o'clock. I guess we can begin. So we are at the end of the book of Shmuel Beis, chapter 24. And I mentioned at the end of yesterday's class that there are some discrepancies here because the story is repeated in the book of Chronicles. And so the numbers don't seem to match. So we were learning about David having Yoav count the Jewish people. And it took him 9 months and 20 days. And Yoav gave, we're in verse 9, again, chapter 24, verse 9, Yoav gave the sum of the number of people over to the king. In Israel were 800,000 men of war, drawers of the sword. And the men of Judah, 500,000 men. That does seem a little surprising that there were so many more proportionately, relative to the numbers. There was so many more of the book from Judah than from the rest of the tribes. You just mute everyone here. So I don't really have an answer for that. It doesn't seem like the commentaries dwell on that. Because why is Judah there has so many people? And again, they counted from the age of 13, which was another surprising thing that this count involved, that the Jewish people were normally they're counted from the age of 20. In this count, they were counted from the age of 13. And what really is surprising, and I didn't find any of the commentaries talk about this, is why was the group from Yehuda, Ish Yehuda, was 500,000, and the entire Jewish people was only 800,000. There's another 11 tribes. So why did Yehuda take up such a large percentage of this count? So I don't have an answer for that. What the commentaries do talk about is the discrepancy here between the book of Shmuel and the book of Chronicles, because in the book of Divrei Hayamim, it mentions that the entire Jewish people were 1.1 million, 1,100,000. So in here, we're saying there's 800,000, and they come up with the understanding, different ways of explaining it. One way of explaining it that's mentioned is that the tribe of Levi and the tribe of Levi, in addition to the tribe of Binyamin, were not counted in this count that it mentions in Shmuel. And were not added to the numbers here. They were counted, they just weren't included. But in the book of Divrei Hayamim, they were included. Now, why wasn't Levi and why wasn't the tribe of Benjamin counted or included in these numbers? Why would they have been left out? So you have to keep in mind that Yoav did not want to do the count in the first place. So he was only doing this against his will because David HaMelech had forced him or obligated him to make this count. Yoav felt this is wrong. I should not be doing this count in the first place. So Yoav took any excuse that he could to exclude a tribe. Now, the tribe of Levi had a good reason to excuse it. So Yoav figured, let me leave it out. He left it out because the tribe of Levi never was included in all the other counts. Levi always seemed to have a different calculation. They're like the important VIPs. They're the aristocrats. They're the special in the league of the the king's personal family, so they were never counted with the rest of the Jewish people. The other so Yoav had an excuse not to include them in this count. Additionally, the people of Benjamin, if you remember from way back when we studied the book of Judges, the tribe of Benjamin almost became extinct. It was almost killed out. There was a war, a civil war between the Jewish people, a very sad and dark part of our history, that there was a war between the Jewish tribes against Benjamin, the tribes against Benjamin. And what ended up happening was the tribe of Benjamin was almost killed out, and miraculously it was able. They came up with a heter and leniency of how we could allow them to marry other tribes, at least whoever was left from them, and be able to build up the tribe. But it was still very small, and it was a small tribe, and the holiday of Tu B'Av, the 15th of Av, one of the reasons for that holiday, which comes right after Tisha B'Av, is because that was when we permitted those that were left from the tribe of Benjamin to be able to marry the other tribes and be able to keep their tribe in existence. And because there were a number of men from the tribe of Benjamin that weren't married, and if we allowed them to marry the other tribes, that it was going to be allow them to stay a tribe and not die out. And initially, the Jewish people had forbidden the tribes from marrying Benjamin because of the terrible thing that happened. Called the story is called Pilegesh Begiva. And that's a story that we learned about in the end of the book of Judges. So the thing is that Yoav had a good excuse now. Yoav said, I don't want to count the tribe of Benjamin because counting is a cause for possible plagues. Now, if all the other tribes have a plague, it's bad, but at least they'll stay in existence. If the tribe of Benjamin has a plague, there'll be no one left. So Yoav felt that he could get away without counting. He had an excuse not to count them, and he would be able to get away with it. But the fact that the numbers, there's a discrepancy in the numbers, and here it says there was 800,000, and in the book of Chronicles, it says 1,100,000, or 1.1 million. So one of the ways of reconciling this contradiction is by saying Yoav actually counted the entire Jewish people, but he didn't include those numbers in the count. He did the count, but he didn't include the numbers, because if he would have included the numbers, he felt that the king would have that it could cause an evil eye, and he didn't want there to be an evil eye, especially against Benjamin. In addition, he didn't want there to be an evil eye against anyone, and he tried to use whatever excuse he could, so he didn't count Levi either. What it seems like, according to that interpretation, what it seems like is Yoav was nervous that David HaMelech is going to claim that Yoav is not listening to him. And so therefore, Yoav did count everyone. But even though he counted them, he didn't add their numbers into the calculation of the total. He didn't add their numbers in the total because he felt that would, if he minimized their number, that didn't mention their numbers, it wouldn't cause such an ayin hara. So he counted them, but he didn't include it. Divrei Hayamim, the book of Chronicles, it mentions the full numbers, but that's not what he gave David HaMelech. David HaMelech, he gave these numbers. And that was Yoav's excuse for both why he didn't include them and also why he counted them. He counted them because he was nervous David would have a complaint against him and maybe could call him rebellious. But he didn't count them but he didn't include those numbers because he didn't want there to be an ayin hara, and he tried to minimize whatever he could in any way, shape, or form. And along those lines, I mentioned earlier also that even his numbers, he had two calculations with all of his numbers. One of them was the full number, And that full number was, even that full number was not exact necessarily. He sort of relied on whatever the people told him. He didn't exactly go around counting, each person. He sort of relied, okay, how many people in this area, in this house, in this neighborhood, he sort of like trusted them and just took their numbers, whatever they gave him, because he felt that also would minimize any plague that might come about through counting the Jewish people. And then he also had an alternative number that he sort of minimized the numbers, and he removed some of the zeros maybe at the end, or he removed, he made it smaller in order that David should not feel the pride which he felt was part of the cause that could cause a plague, was the fact that we're counting the Jewish people for no reason, and David is just doing this out of pride. So he tried to minimize that by not giving David the full pleasure of how many people are his constituents and his people of his kingdom. Okay, so that's the story here. That's one answer. Now there is another way of answering these numbers, and that is that it's not a contradiction with the book of Chronicles, because David HaMelech had 288,000 type of servants that did service. They did service once 1 month a year for the king. So in our numbers, it doesn't count them, because David HaMelech knew about those numbers, the 288,000, plus there were 12,000 that were like the supervisors on top of those 288,000. So in other words, each there were 12 groups. They worked for a month every year. 12 groups of 24,000 equals 288,000. Because if you multiply 12 and 24,000, it comes to 288,000 plus a group of supervisors, 1,000 supervisors every month. So that would be another 12,000. It comes out to 300,000. If you add 300,000 to the 800,000 that our numbers say, you end up with 1.1 million, which is the numbers that it says in the book of Chronicles. Now, the other discrepancy from the book of Chronicles is that it says the people of Yehuda were 500,000. The book of Chronicles, it says they were 470,000. There's a discrepancy of 30,000 there. So one of the ways of answering that is that both of the numbers are simply rounded off. Even the 500,000 is a rounded off number. So our book rounded it off to the next 100,000. The book of Chronicles rounded it off to 470,000. Was it exactly 470,000? That's also not exact. It was 469 maybe, or 468. It rounded it off to 470. It might have been 472. But it rounded it off to 470,000. So this is just another rounding off to the number 500,000. The other option is possibly it didn't count the people that lived in Jerusalem. One of the countings doesn't count that, and that's another way of answering this issue. Yes, Yehudis or Yisrael, you have your hand up?
Yeah, the authorship of Divrei Hayamim and Shmuel are different. Is that also perhaps a factor in the numbers conflict we're talking about?
The problem is, no matter who you are, the numbers should be the same. No matter who the author is, it shouldn't change anything. You know what I mean? So that I don't see how that would help. You know what I mean? It's a calculation of numbers. So
yeah.
The author, I don't know if that would do anything.
The assumption is they were both relying on the same Masod, the authors.
Yeah. I think Ezra wrote Divrei Hayamim, if I'm not mistaken.
I believe so. Yes.
Okay. So anyway, the verse that we're up to is verse 10. And before we do verse 10, the source that that David had a larger number and a smaller number was in verse 9, where it said the sum of the number of the people. And in the Hebrew, it says mispar and mifkad. And mifkad could mean missing, and mispar means the number. So the Medrash interprets it to mean that there were two numbers. One was the full number, and the other one was the mifkad, which means the missing, the one that was missing numbers. That means David used an addition. He had additional count that was missing a lot of the numbers. Okay, and now verse 10, it says, David's heart smote him after having counted the people, and David said to Hashem, I have sinned greatly in what I have done. So David HaMelech realized now that he sinned. The problem is it's a little too late. He counted already the Jewish people. But he says, I've sinned greatly in what I have done. And now, Hashem, please remove the sin of your servant, for I have acted foolishly. Niskalti ma'oid in the Hebrew. Sochol is a fool. I have acted foolishly. So David arose the next morning, and the word of Hashem had come to the prophet Gad. Now, don't confuse this with God. There's God, and then there's a prophet by the name of Gad. And Gad also is a name of one of the tribes. So just because in English, the word God, it sounds like God, but this is the prophet Gad. Now, David HaMelech had two main prophets in his day. One of them was Nasan Hanavi, and the other one was Gad. And Gad seems to have been, at least the way the Radak learns, Gad was the personal prophet that he would speak to David HaMelech often. Whenever Hashem wanted to give some type of prophecy to David, it was basically through Gad. And even though in the book of Shmuel base, we don't find Gad giving many prophecies, that's only because they're not all written down. But he was the Choizei David. If you look in the Hebrew, maybe it's a little more clear. David's seer. In other words, David's prophet. He was the Choizei David. So it sounds like he was commonly giving prophecies to David. That's what from the Hebrew, that's what it sounds like. And the Radak spells this out. So David arose the next morning, and the word of Hashem had come to the prophet Gad, David's seer, saying, go and say to David, thus says Hashem, I am holding 3 things upon you. Or choose for yourself one of them, and I shall do it to you. Now, this is basically Hashem giving David a choice of what one of the 3 punishments would David like. And the commentaries mention that the reason why David was given these 3 choices of which punishment to have is because David HaMelech said something, again, on his level, which was inappropriate. When David was trying to persuade his officers not to kill Shaul, he mentioned to them 3 things. He mentioned to them that Shaul is anyway going to die. We don't have to kill him. Either a plague is going to affect him, or the day will come and he'll die, or he'll die in war. Now, the fact that David said those 3 punishments, and he sort of placed them upon Shaul, so that caused that in this scenario where he deserved some type of punishment, Hashem offered him also three things, three options. And now David was not praying that Shaul would die. David didn't mean it that way. But the fact that he spoke that way and he had these thoughts about Shaul, so according to the high level that God expected from David, this was considered a sin. And it caused that when David did sin, he was sort of punished with this type of a with this three option.
How does that punish you? Giving you a choice to pick your pain. How is that a punishment?
So it's, if you look at the answer that David HaMelech says, this is not much of a choice. All three of them are bad options.
Right.
But it rubs it in. It rubs it in that he did something wrong, and said something he shouldn't have. This is not my own insight. This is Rashi. Rashi mentions this, and it's from a medrash, but it corresponds to the three things that he gave to Shaul, that he mentioned about Shaul. So possibly they are more harsh than you would have expected for this, but however the case is, it definitely rubs it in that David did something wrong, and it brings back that memories of when he said such a thing about Shaul that he shouldn't have. And what I think it does for us is gives us a wake-up call, how careful we should be. Sometimes, we speak too much, and speaking too much sometimes costs you. Sometimes it's better not to say everything that's on your mind. There's a Yiddish saying, "Nicht alt was is emes darf man sagen." Not everything that's true do you have to say. You might think a certain thing, but especially in David's caliber and David's being king, he was expected to speak in a much more respectful and just very careful in how he chose his words. Now,
Reden is silver and schweigen is gold. Another old Yiddish saying.
Yeah. So, well, it's Gemara in Megillah, no? That shtika b'shtayim, right? We got the term. You'll come to it over there. Okay, so yes, David.
In Me'am Lo'ez, it says that in fact David deserved all three punishments, but because he accepted suffering with love, justifying the afflictions as his just deserts, two of the three punishments were nullified.
So I guess what that means is that Hashem was saying you really deserve all three because of your sin. Okay, maybe that answers Isaac's question a little better. That why was this more painful to David if he had three choices? And really what Hashem was saying is you deserve all three. And that was what was more painful maybe to David when he heard that he deserves all three, even though Hashem is going to let him go. But the fact that he deserves all three maybe was painful for David to.
Wait, who picked the three?
No, David got a choice to choose which one.
But he was told which of the three choices.
You deserve all three. And you're only, if that's according to what David just read, it sounds like that might be an answer to your question, that knowing that he deserves all three to David would be that was a harsh punishment itself. Okay, so going back.
He also says in the Amloes that the fact that he was presenting him with the options shows that the Jewish people deserve to be punished. But David, because of his own misdeed, have been chosen by Hashem as the means through which to enact the punishment.
Say that one more time. You're muted. By mistake, you must have pressed mute.
It says that presenting David with the options indicated that while Israel deserved to be punished, David, because of his own misdeed, had been chosen by Hashem as the means through which to enact that punishment. Because the punishments were not actually visited upon, they were actually visited upon the Jews, and
Right.
not David personally, but because he was their king, he was presented with the option, with the choice.
Right.
But he says that the Jewish people deserve to be punished. He doesn't show the details, and he doesn't. This is the Me'am Lois where it doesn't tell the source.
Yeah. So the thing that you're mentioning really is connected to what we'll soon see about who got what ended up happening. But thank you for sharing that, and especially the first part was very interesting, that he deserved all three. Okay, so we are going to continue here on verse 13. Verse 13. So God came to David and told him, he said to him, would you rather have 7 years of famine coming to your land, or 3 months of fleeing from your enemy while he pursues you, or 3-day pestilence in your land? And I don't like the word pestilence because I always think of pestilence as with an animal plague, but I guess that's not true. Pestilence. I don't know. They translate dever in the always as pestilence, but I guess it's not always used that way. It's a plague against people. What we're talking about here, a COVID or something, serious thing, Magaifa, a plague. So here he is given 3 options: 7 years of famine, 3 months of fleeing from your enemy, or a plague, 3-day plague. Now determine and consider what answer I should return to the one who has sent me. In other words, what should I tell Hashem? God, the prophet God, is asking David, what should I tell Hashem? So David said to God, I am exceedingly distressed. Like, which one is worse than the other, and let us fall into the hands of Hashem, for his mercies are abundant.
Rabbi, can I ask a quick question?
Yes.
The word one and who is capitalized. Why is that?
The reason it's capitalized is because it's referring to Hashem.
Then why don't they say Hashem? Why isn't Hashem?
Because it doesn't use.
Translation?
Because if you look in the Hebrew, he doesn't say Hashem's name.
Why not? There's nothing that says that we're not allowed to say the name, is there?
Well, we don't normally say Hashem's name unless it's in a verse or it's a part of a blessing. Otherwise, it's using God's name in vain. And what they're trying to do is just translate the words of the text.
I think also you don't want to say Hashem bringing the curse. It's enough to say he is bringing, or the one who brings. You don't want to associate.
You always know who's bringing it. I mean, it's pretty self-evident. We know who's doing everything. I mean,
so you don't want to associate it with.
You don't want to say it. You're not allowed to say or in print, maybe.
And additionally, you have to, whenever you're talking about Hashem, you capitalize it. He said this. So the verse is using that type of a pronoun. And so when they translate it, they're translating it and they capitalize that word, he. So that's just good to know. So that's why you see it printed that way.
Thank you.
So they're just trying to translate it.
Hebrew doesn't have capitals.
In what?
Hebrew does not have capitals.
Doesn't have capitals. Right. But in the English, whenever you're referring to Hashem, you use a capital. So that's why it spells it that way. Okay, so we just read now the Hebrew of this verse, a very popular verse, at least for they say this pasuk in by the Tachanun, at least in some nuschai, some of the prayer books have this verse where David tells the prophet God, Tsar li ma'od, I am very pained and distressed. Nipla nabiyad Hashem, let us fall in the hands of Hashem because He is more merciful. And Rabim Rachmav, He is abundantly merciful, and we shouldn't fall in the hands of humans. And this is a very interesting verse because what it's really saying is that David chose one of the three punishments. And the one he chose was based on the fact that he wanted a punishment directly from Hashem, and it should not come through the hands or involve any other people. Because if it involves other people, people will not have mercy on us. But if it involves Hashem, Hashem will have mercy on us. And when it comes to a famine, David was nervous. Well, a famine, people will end up needing the help of other nations. And will end up being subject to food from other nations. We will need their mercy, and they might not be merciful to us. If it involves fleeing from our enemy, that also involves the enemy fighting us. And that would also be a subject to a human being's mercy, which we cannot rely on. But if it involves a plague is directly from Hashem. And directly from Hashem, we can rely on Hashem's mercy. And so that was the reason why he chose this 3-day plague. And Mitzvah Hashem, next week, we'll continue and find out what exactly happened. Okay, I'm going to conclude here. Rabbi Warner
doesn't want a long punishment.
Well, that's an interesting thing. He doesn't use that as the excuse.
I know he doesn't want to be in the hands of people, but
the excuse is the people. But maybe that's a good question. Why wasn't that enough of a reason that this only will last a few days and those will last a long time? So maybe we'll talk about it.
7 years is a long time.
Oh yeah, sure.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Have a great day. Here's Rabbi Wernick.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Good afternoon, everybody. How are you?
Good afternoon, Rabbi. How are you?
Not doing well. Okay, so just before we begin, we're Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, the abridged code of Jewish law, chapter 2. We're up to number 3.